We are making a game, and we're using the Unity game engine. We're programming in C# and blah, 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 but we've been doing that for a while. Let's do something else, yeah? We're at the stage where we should be thinking about art and sound. And so we're going to talk about some art and sound. The game we're making, though, we should look at that. And I am flying a little blind today because Twitch apparently has issues with me staying logged in on my devices. This avatar, OBS, my browser, the app on my phone, the app on my other device. I use these, and apparently I just can't log into all of them. Oh, okay. Thanks, Twitch. Why not? Yeah, let's just say their two-factor authentication is broken when it says, we sent you a text. And they did not send me a text. I can't do anything about it. So, aside from the fact that they asked me to reset my password and caused everything to be reconfigured and relogged, it's just garbage. Absolute trash. Whatever. Hey, I hope this works. Don't know if it'll work. But I'm hoping it does. And I will look at it later, and if it didn't work, I won't publish the VOD. How about that? So previously on this development, in our game called Shuffle Wars, you can log in. Let's do this account. Which is to say there's a local file where you save your data. And you save it because you have an account that you have a password to and stuff. And so there could be multiple accounts on your computer, and that's all it is. It's not really on the web. This recovery email thing is garbage. This is, not true. But it's there to represent what the game is meant to do, right? So you can play the game, and we've gotten it to a stage where you have all the functionality you would expect, but wow, it certainly looks like nothing. I mean, even where there is some visual stuff, it's really bare bones and sort of simple, right? In short, there's no audio, very little audio, actually. We do have music going on. Little or no audio, almost no visuals either. And so, yes, you can play this. The rules are run. That is true. You can play this game, but without knowing, like, for example, without understanding what the game is, it would be tricky. So we added this tutorial recently. And along with that, we said, well, there are other things, now that we're looking at it, there are other things that are not clear until you play the game. And if you understand the game, then it makes sense. If you don't, right, and new players won't know, then it's a problem. So even something as simple as saying, like, when you do damage, how much damage are you doing? Because that relates to the cards you pick. It relates to the damage they have. The defense they have, the power they have. And you make choices about what cards you want to play based on these stats, and then the stats translate into damage. And hey, we never actually show how much damage is being done. Well, that was the change we did most recently. So when these cards actually meet in battle now and do attacks, you can see the damage fly off. See. So some cards do more damage than others, and then it makes sense when they're gone. A little more help for a new player to see what is happening. That's the recent thing we did. And still, this is bare bones. There's hardly anything to show you what's going on. And there's some stuff here, like this button to do the next round, this button to go into battle, and it's called do play. You know, this button to march the cards forward until they actually turn over. Like, this only made sense in the context of me working on the original prototype battle script. It does not make sense to a player. This is really confusing. This is functionally complete, but consider for a moment how useless it is if the player doesn't understand it. It is, in fact, a brick. Unusable software is a brick. And in this case, we have to acknowledge that although it is functionally complete, it is playing our game as we've designed. And there's lots of cool things going on when you understand what's going on. But a new player does not. And a new player needs to be introduced to the ideas. A new player needs to become familiar with things that they are ignorant of, and it's not their fault. Of course it's not. It is our burden to explain to players what it is that they're in for, what they are going to be challenged by, how should they see this game. If we give them a basic overview, like this is battle, but it's played with cards, and so you pick the cards that you're going to put into battle. These are forces, these are creatures, and they're fantastic, and they're kind of silly, right? Functionally, this is complete, but it does not communicate well to a player at all. This is where art and sound are going to be our friends. This is where little things like that tutorial thing can help. This is where little things like this display of how much damage is being done can help, because it is communication to a player about things which they did not know, things they should want to know about as they play, things they will have questions about. And particularly if they don't know, they won't know to ask the questions. This is not up to us to hope they get it. It's up to us to explain to them the things they don't know. We're teaching them. So there are lots of little details in this functionally complete prototype, sure. But it is so not ready to be put in front of a player. A player doesn't understand this. A play tester might. If we explain to them, hey, this is an early version of a game. Thank you for helping us make this game better. Please explore the application. Please give us your feedback on what you think it is telling you, without us telling you what it should be telling you. Please give us feedback on what you think, right? We're going to get feedback kind of like this. Let me role play as a new player. Like, okay, shuffle wars. What do we mean? I'm going to shuffle in order to do battle? The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. What is this? Made you look. What is that? This is confusing, right? Right off the bat, first screen. This is confusing. And so trust is broken. I'm like wondering what the heck is going on. And if I get here, I'm like, hey, how come these buttons are grayed out? I don't understand. Tutorial. What is this? Like, at least there is a tutorial. And I at least am explaining to them this is a battle card game, and I'm showing them a view that they are going to see if they do quick play. But they may have skipped this entirely. Some players do this, and they may have just gone here and said, this is the biggest button, let me try this. What's this? If I'm role-playing as a brand new player, I'm really confused. Round 0, 0 minus 0. Do round. What is this? Right? And I don't even see any other buttons, so I guess I have to press this. Oh, here's this view. Like, what happened? Am I... clicking these cards. Like, there's lots of ways in which a player is going to be confused. Just, oh wait, I can hover over this and lift a card. Oh, I didn't know that. That's nice. Well, is that all I can do? I mean, seriously, this is what a player might do. They might be in this position of just like, oh wow, I guess I'm stuck. Not realizing if they click, they can actually see, and if they let go, it goes back. And if they click and drag, they can drag it on here. I mean, this is time for us to start talking to our player, at least about how to play. But even before that, don't we want to introduce this a little bit better? This first screen was a letdown to begin with, and that's exactly wrong. We don't want that. We want our player to experience what this game is going to promise. We want to set the promise to the player. In effect, we're going to promise the player a particular experience, and then we back it up. We show them things, we play sounds and visuals, we get them to interact with the systems in a way that meets those expectations we set when we promise them something. Let's take this campaign for a second. And first of all, you can do a profile and make your own identity. Isn't that nice? Well, campaign also has these icons and things and these funny names. And the story is talking about a fantasy sort of place with weird people and things and events going on. Now, if the player, a new player, looking at the game as it is right now, this would just seem total weird, out of nowhere. It would make zero sense. Understandably so. It's not their fault. Of course, it's never the player's fault. It's our burden to help them understand. In that way, if they had expected this sort of story, then it wouldn't feel weird. If they had expected a fantasy place with creatures and people and things and events that are unfamiliar but kind of funny and don't take themselves too seriously, then they read this story and it makes more sense. It meets some expectations, but we have never set those expectations. Instead, we have nothing. Instead, this looks like this. So right off the bat, we're challenged to think about what is it going to take to set appropriate expectations of the player so that when they do go into the game, at least the core gameplay, the profile, the campaign, the pearls, these begin to make sense. Like if we say you can go into battle against an opponent with forces and creatures of a fantasy type, they might say great. And then they get to this tutorial and they see how to do that. And they're like, good, I was asking how am I going to do it? And now I see how that's going to work. Okay, good. And they're on board with us. They're on our side. We're meeting their expectations and we can go, right? But as of now, this is just not there. There's nothing there. What do games normally do? Games normally start with some kind of introduction. Some kind of cinematic, slideshow, something to show the promise. Well, let's do that. Let's go with that. I'm going to start excuse me. I'm going to start by sketching this out if I can. I sure hope this is all working. I literally can't tell, and I hope it is, but I just don't know. It's the technical gods today that are... They must be appeased. So what we have is a case of user experience design, UX design. You might be saying, oh, what, you mean interface? No, we already have an interface, basically. It's really bare bones. And perhaps what we do will result in interface design, sure, but user experience design is a very large tent. Game design is in that tent. UI design is in that tent. But frankly, so is music composition. So is art. If I look at a painting, I have an experience. There's some experience design going on there. No joke. It's going all the way back to the psychology of our audience. In this case, we have a need to say, look out, player, there's this game. And regardless of what we end up calling this, right now it is called Shuffle Wars. But we need to immediately start a conversation with our audience. Our player is, starting our game and maybe has no expectations whatsoever. We could go all the way back to the icon that is displayed in Windows. This icon is currently looking like a pearl. Well, that's confusing. What is this? It's currently a pearl. It's purple. And underneath, there's the title Shuffle Wars. So this is already totally confusing. They double click on this. Really? Thank goodness they double click, because then we can start talking to them. But until then, this is, I don't even know if I want to double click on it, right? If I'm role playing as a new player, this makes no sense. If, for example, we showed cards and some sort of battle or swords or I don't know what, something that said this is about battle and cards. At least then, when it said Shuffle Wars, that would make sense. It might not be exciting yet. It may not convey the themes of our game yet, but this would make more sense. We see all the way back to double clicking on the icon to start the game. This is where we start. In fact, the title is one of the first things that the player can use to begin to understand what they're getting into. This is the first step in user experience. So our user experience design begins all the way back here. What is the first contact with our audience? And how do we set those expectations? And you bet, first impressions, that's what we're talking about. So let's say we get past this stage, we have a better title or the thing just makes sense or whatever it is, right? They have double clicked. Thank goodness. We now have a player engaged with the game, because before then, our game wasn't doing anything. It doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter how well designed it is. If they didn't start it, it doesn't exist. But now we have a player and they are engaged with the game, so cool. We have a splash screen. That is exactly what we call that thing with the title, and the button that says begin, and the button that says quit, and then the little legalese at the bottom. That's what the splash screen currently is, and it's just a screen. It goes to our main menu, which again says Shuffle Wars, and then there's a series of buttons. You got profile, options, credits. You have Pearl Collection, tutorial, and home, which would send you back to the splash screen. And then two big buttons in the center, because we do want to highlight that quick play and campaign are the main things you want to be doing. So we make them big, we put them in the center, that's UI design. But UX design says, hold on, do we even know, as a player who's never seen this before, do we even know what's going on? Not really. We understand games and menus, so this is not totally unfamiliar, but it is confusing. Man, I hope this stream is working. I've done it enough that I can kind of trust, but today's been so weird. In this way, the option screen can be, you go to it and you can go back. There's a back button. Same with the credits screen. Now again, UX design is not UI design, but I happen to be sketching out the UI menu flow because that's all we have right now. Okay, we're going to transition now to talking about what the experience means. Yeah, I can see the credits. That's nice. I can set some buttons on some things. Okay, cool. But let's get real. You know, there are other menus. You got Perl. You got tutorial, which is really a pop-up. It doesn't really go anywhere, I guess. But then home goes back. Okay. You have the campaign screen. And then you have the main game, right? The main game is the core gameplay with the prototype battle script that's been running the whole thing. And this is just straight up confusing. But it's there. So, profile. So, I mean, this is what we have. And it's kind of like functionally complete is cold comfort when you realize that a new player will just stop, like right here. They will stop because things don't make sense. In fact, they may not even get there. They may stop here because things don't make sense. User experience challenges us to find it challenges us to figure out what we can do to communicate to the player, first of all, what the promise of the game is. Make that clear to them. Hopefully it's exciting to them. And then back it up. In other words, if I promised you you're going to dungeon crawl with a party of elves and you're going to be with the bow, but another elf has good as a thief and another one has armor on and they're going to be the tank, and you're going to battle skeletons and goblins, and there's going to be magic and puzzles and traps. Well, I better back that up. I should see swords within a couple of clicks. I should see monsters within a minute or 5, right? It should be really quick. I should see some evidence that this promise is going to be fulfilled, even if I'm just showing it in art on the menus. See where I'm going with this? Let's add more to this discussion. If I have a style of a character, of environment, of visual effects, then I can move forward. But let's pretend we have that style thought out. We don't yet. I have some good ideas about it. I've talked about Maxfield Parrish as a good starting point to think about the color and the realism, composition, the tone. There's lots of good things to talk about, but let's pretend we have a style. We don't yet. I might say, well, there's a character that we want to show right off the bat. It might be that immediately players identify with this character and say, oh, that's me, right? At that moment, whatever I do to that character, whether I give them, gold coins or I, throw a monster in their face, they're going to feel like, oh no, or they're going to feel like, yay, because they've already identified with this character. If I show potentially, this is just an example of user experience. If I show instead a group all at once, and they're all relatively the same in terms of importance, there's no prominent, like if I showed this character along with these characters, it would be clear that people would focus on this one and think that's them. But if I show this with 3 characters and they're all blood, then I don't identify with any one of them. I think of them as some group of people. Whether they're bunnies or turtles or raccoons or people or dragons or whatever, what I'm talking about is character that an audience can identify with because they want to figure out what is going on. If I first show them music, a setting, and characters, I'm beginning to show them the promise of this game. In this case, this is a fantasy land with fantasy forces, fantasy creatures, and fantasy people, fantasy villagers, fantasy elves, and raccoons, and squirrels, and things. A lot of the story and the names of the cards have lent themselves to this idea that there is this fantasy land, and it might be like forests and natural stuff, but with fantasy elements in it, that nature and supernatural kind of combine. So I'm going to show nature. I'm showing something other than nature. So if I have like a forest, it might be a good idea to also show like a unicorn. Now, this is just an example, but you get the idea. If it was just a forest, they don't know that this is a fantasy land. But if I show you a unicorn at the same time, aha, now at least you're in the right place. And if I also show you some people, maybe they are friendly but small, perhaps there's lots of them, and if I show you this setting, you get the idea that this is, well, you don't get the idea of the promise yet, but what you get is something. In the absence of something, the player kind of gives up. The audience does not know what to think about where am I, who am I, what am I trying to do, what do I have working for me, what do I have working against me. These 5 questions are the questions that players ask. And we've talked about this before. Now we're talking it in terms of like the very first moments of looking at this game, the splash screen, which should not just be a static screen. It really should be a display of the promise. So if we talk about these 5 questions, let's do this. These are the questions the audience asks. Who am I? And this we can't really answer. It's funny. Our game doesn't really have a protagonist character that you embody. Later, you get to make your profile. And perhaps we can borrow the idea from other games that show an example player. I think Hearthstone does this in their splash screen sequence. It shows a little girl and she plays cards with a bunch of fantasy creatures. I don't want to ape their opening cinematic, but that's how they answer this question. That's how Hearthstone does it. They show an example character. Now, if you're not a girl, you might be like, I can't identify with it. But, for the most part, people can just go with it. In fact, you'd be surprised how easy it is for people to adopt. Like, I just showed you this circle with 2 dots and a line, and you said, oh, that's me. Really? So let me continue. This one might be a little tricky for our game because we need to think about how we're going to present who the main character, who the player character is, right? Where am I is the next question. And this is the environment in which they will play. Right? In any game, they're going to ask this. Even chess, frankly, it's the board, the game board. And the bounds of the game board, the squares, are really all there is in chess. But other games have different expressions of what the game world is. In our case, this kind of scene would do it. This would tell them, this is where you are. You're in this fantasy land where unicorns exist and people, and there's natural, but there's also supernatural. Do you see this? And we might say more things about it, right? We might add other items and things, but what am I trying to do, right? What is my objective? That is literally on the box. When you flip the lid of a box of the board game up and look at the other side of the lid, the objective of the game is the very first rule you see. What is my objective? This is a question all players ask. By the way, while we're talking about board games, the way board games handles this, the cover of the box explains who they are and where they are. It is the cover on the lid on the board game that makes the promise of the game. Go check out board games. You'll see what I'm saying. That's how they do it. So they do it with a single image. And we could do the same thing. We could have a slideshow. Absolutely. We could have actually animated elements. I mean, I'm experienced with that. We could totally do that. But let's keep going. So who am I? Where am I? What is my objective? And in that objective, what works in my favor? Right? What do I have working for me? This is, in our game, the cards you choose, the tactics you employ, the pearls you will eventually collect, the experience you gain, even the experience you gain helps you understand the game and play better, right? But what works in your favor? The cards you pick, right? The basic core game is about selecting cards and then going into battle. The formation you choose to do, right? Tactics you will learn eventually, the emergent gameplay that you do, right? What works in your favor is learning the game better, learning how to play better. Right? What works against me? Well, what am I challenged by? That's another way to say it. And the answer to that in our game is the opponent. It is the luck of the draw. It is the challenge of a campaign where you have to do several matches to collect the thing. By the way, pearls are also working in your favor. Pearl collections. So there are answers to this question, to these 5 questions. And players can be patient in getting answers to these questions. But make no mistake, they will ask these 5 questions. And if you neglect to address them at all, they will leave. They will check out mentally. They will just close the game, whatever. In this case, we have a way of saying this one. We can say where you are with a simple screen, but we don't have anything like this yet, right? Explaining that this is a fantasy land that is both natural and supernatural, that there are forces and creatures that you've heard about in fairy tales, that you've been hearing about in myth, that are sometimes cute and cuddly and sometimes terrifying, super powerful, dominating, right? The forces that are represented on the cards are those kinds of creatures and forces. The forces that are talked about in the story, in the campaign, those creatures, the people, the places, the events, the items, the object of their desire is all fantasy of a gentle kind, right? And that lends itself to say, who are you? Well, you are the hero. Okay, we don't really say this in any way explicitly, but it is absolutely implied that you help people in campaigns and you defeat villains who are doing bad things to these people, and you help those people defeat the villain, and they are happy that you did that. You will get this eventually, but we don't explicitly say this until you've actually gone through some campaigns. So we're late to explaining what this answer is. What is my objective? The defeating your enemy in a match objective, attaining the end of a campaign objective, the collecting more pearls objective, the gaining more experience and levels objective. These are also not explained until later, but we should. This is a need. We need to explain this one. This one really should be explained up front. What is my objective can't be left until later. If people are wondering what's going on, including what am I supposed to do, we fail. So this is a super big need. We need to deal with this. Now, this could be part of our opening cinematic. This could be part of this splash cinematic. Splash meaning like it's the first thing they see. It is splashy, flashy, and attention grabbing. I will call it a cinematic for now. I'm hesitating to actually describe it as animated video. Instead, I would think of it more like a slideshow, perhaps elements that do move, because we have that mechanic, we can do that. But they would be limited animation and would rely more on the style of the drawing. Yeah. So we could describe where you are and what my objective is, and perhaps even who I am in this opening cinematic, and that would really, really, really help. It would help because a player is not now questioning why they're even here. They're paying attention enough to expect that they go into battle, that they defeat enemies, that they achieve things. And when they hear stories about the people they're saving, it's not weird that it's a unicorn or that they're trying to defeat a villain. These other questions, what works in my favor? What am I challenged by? This will have to come immediately after, for sure. We do have a tutorial, but that is just not enough. What am I challenged by? This will emerge for sure. But I think we have a priority. By listing out these 5 questions, we realize that we can actually get this question answered quickly, easily with a single image, and we should. We really need to set the setting. Where is this game taking place? What is the game world that the player is going to transport themselves to? Who am I will help them do this. Although we kind of like the idea that we don't explicitly show a player character. Because it's really the player. That's who's doing this. Who am I? It's you. You are the hero. That's what I would love to communicate. And maybe we can get there. This one I think we can do. Where am I? What is my objective? I think we have to do. And so if it is an opening cinematic thing, slideshow like this, we can show the setting. We can show a beginning, middle, and end, similar to what we do with the campaign, frankly, that will actually, if we show a campaign story, that would be fantastic. That would do it. There are these people, they have this thing that they really like, and it is special to them, and it was stolen. It is vanished. It is under a spell. There's something wrong. And so they're sad. And we help them. And we are exposed to battling terrible, huge forces and creatures of immense power and all that. I mean, I'm not going to be able to sketch the scale of what I'm talking about here, but let's imagine that this forest is like the trees are down here, like I'm talking like this, right? And we do so with some card selections and things. I mean, the sketch is not doing it justice, but the idea is if there's a beginning, middle, and end to this cinematic with just slideshow, you can imagine half a dozen slides at minimum, but maybe a maximum of 12, where we show forces battling each other because of cards that we laid down. I mean, there has to be cards in this to help describe what works in my favor. That would help. But also what my objective is. Well, I think it's going to be clear once you have forces going after each other. Maybe it's not card against creature, but your card turns into another creature, right? And they go after each other. This sketch is getting gross, but you get the idea. If I can show you that you're going to pick cards going to turn into creatures, they're going to go after other big creatures, and it's going to be this crazy fantasy battle that's over the top and wild, and then you win. And then you, there's what's challenged by as well, actually. I mean, literally, we represent creatures and forces to be the opposing force. That's the challenge. What works in your favor? Well, you can also have creatures and forces you send into battle. You just choose. And so your objective can be shown in this cinematic because not only are we saying where you are, but we show you defeating forces because you chose cards and you saw those creatures that come out of the cards battling other creatures and winning. In which case, this gets resolved. This thing comes back, just like a campaign story does, and you see yourself as a hero. All right. This quick, off-the-cuff, improv intro cinematic story that I just explained would check all the boxes. Because after seeing this, there isn't a player who was paying attention, who wouldn't be able to answer these questions in some way. They might answer it in different ways, but at least they would be able to answer them, and they wouldn't leave it as a question, which would cause them to quit the game. So what we're saying is this is a primary feature. We need a cinematic-like thing on the splash screen. If you've never played this game before, we need to show this to you. And maybe you can skip it, but if you want to see it again, we want to show it to you. This is the promise. This is the promise of the game. The game's promise is with the player, and it comes from the designer. And we tell them, you are going to be the hero in a fantasy land where you defeat large, fantastic forces because you can control large, fantastic forces to go up against them and save people. Yay. That's the promise. If we can communicate that clearly and then say, now go into the game, you can make a profile, you can do a quick play, you can do a campaign, you can look at the tutorial. Now, those buttons are at least in some context of the promise of the game, and for then, we don't have one. So this is now critical. We actually need to relay this game's promise to players, and that is what we're going to talk about. That's what we're going to do next. I think I've probably already run on a little long here. The next thing we need to do is explore that style that I mentioned we would come up with. The style has to include things like shape, meaning among other things, the shape that we have all of our items and characters and props and effects will follow some convention of shape. I'll give you an example. I think it's Torchlight has a blocky style that is angled with straight lines, and I'm just roughly sketching this to sort of show the point. But even a rock, even just a simple rock and a stone, has this sort of look because they take this angled, blocky style for shape and use it everywhere. This is used in their font, it's used in their props, it's used in spells, it's used in characters. It is everywhere. So shape is a key quality to our art direction. Let's call this out. What this is we're talking about art direction. In order to find the art direction of Shuffle Wars, we're going to need to consider shape. We're also going to need to consider line. The line quality can include if we have a thickness and thinness to lines, or if we decide that all lines should be a single thickness. Look at artwork and you'll see that some opts for a single thickness all the way around and some requires thick and thin. Even if you're doing shadow work and tones and things like that, line quality helps us understand what it is. Line quality can also relate to, if it is solid or broken, and if that's part of the style, right? So line and shape, these are things we can explore, research, study, try out, experiment, prototype, and develop, just like anything else. But now we're talking about art. Another quality in the art direction is color, and this is exactly where I'm talking about Maxfield Parrish being our friend. His famous paintings, Maxfield Parrish in the 20s, his famous paintings have to do with fantasy, where it's also kind of realistic, so it grounds it in a reality. The colors are amazing. The colors speak to, in film, again, it's called The Golden Hour. It's just after dawn or just before dusk. And it's called that in film because it has some excellent lighting. Well, we're going to copy that. Okay, so also his blues are amazing. The color contrast, the hue contrast, value contrast is amazing. There's some really cool stuff. So that is part of the development of the art direction: shape, line, color, as well as lighting. So I mentioned that Maxfield Parrish uses the golden hour, and I talk about that in terms of color, but also it is lighting, because, some styles don't use lighting at all. Some require proper lighting. Some use shadow, some do not. Some have highlights, some do not. So lighting is actually going to be a thing, even if it's all 2D drawn stuff. It's still going to make use of lighting in some way, right? And in our case, I think we're definitely talking about lighting as part of the direction. I mean, there's some simple styles that don't want that to interfere with the simplicity of the drawing. Some cartoons don't use lighting at all, don't use color at all, in fact. Just use line and shape, just to keep it simple and to not have more complicating factors. We actually do want it to be rich. We want it to be, we want the audience to be absorbing multiple factors. If it's okay if it's more complex, it's actually good. We want to hold their attention. If it's a static image that they have to look at on a card, yeah, you better believe it should look awesome. So we want all these things. We are going to explore this. For now, though, I would point you toward Maxfield Parrish. This is a painter in the 1920s, and he is famous, so it's easy to see. Not just examples of his artwork, but you could look at styles that copy his style. In fact, AI has gone crazy with his style. That's fine. I do not want to use AI at all. I don't, because it's way too difficult to get results that are specific. And that's, sorry, design. We are designing this. But this has some realism that we don't really want without changing it slightly. This definitely has good color, good lighting. What I like about the realism is it does ground this fantastic setting. But the problem with full realism is we're going to need to show fantasy fantasy creatures, fantasy forces, and so realism needs to be skewed slightly. Also, realism is labor intensive. This is a difficult style to pull off well. I can, it just takes time. Instead, I'm a fan of simplicity where it can communicate lots of things to many people and it doesn't impose a particular detail. And here's what I mean. There is such a thing as the uncanny valley. Realism is on one side where you better be right on because people are going to look at that and think it's real. And on the other end, it's literally smiley face. And in between these things, people will totally accept this. You put two dots in a line or in a circle and people see a face. Done. Isn't that funny? It's very simple. And so it's easy to produce, but it doesn't have enough detail to communicate more complex things. Realism has all the detail. You can communicate complex things, but you better get it right because in a chart that describes how well people accept it, this is totally acceptable. And this is totally acceptable if it's done perfectly. But if it's not, it immediately drops off and becomes unbelievable, even creepy. Whereas this is okay for quite a while and then drops off. The closer you get to realism, this valley, the uncanny valley, is so described because this is not okay. This is really creepy and not acceptable. So your audience either needs this or that. And I'm saying Maxfield Parrish is definitely in this camp. He's like right here because it does look pretty real. He spent time on that. I kind of need to be on this side of the valley for purposes of getting it done. So what I need is cartoony, something closer to this, while still holding all the color, lighting, and fantasy that Maxfield Parrish does. So I think we can do that. It just means while there are some, let's say, the card images of fantastic forces and creatures, that would definitely benefit from being real. Maybe the people that we save and the environment that we're in and the items that we're trying to get and the events that we're trying to work toward, those can be cartoony. And this, I have to stay out of that valley, but this dance between these two styles, it's going to be the same style. That's another challenge. They have to live in the same universe. But I think it's important to have some realism for the cards in battle while leaving the rest of the environment, including menus and the creatures and the environment and everything, be less serious, less real, would match the tone that I go for when we go from, choosing your profile, playing with your Pearl collection, reading about the story and the campaign, and then going into battle, which is very serious, or at least as serious as this game gets. And cards get destroyed, and there's a lot of power, and it is over the top. I think that's a good contrast. It's neat to be in a place where there's consistency of style and then have contrast. And that's what I think this offers. So I'm going to go with this. There's a style that's going to be inspired by the colors and subjects, and even the composition, by the way. Composition is another. There's a consistent composition Maxfield Parrish does that is relatively straight and even and balanced. It's not Wes Anderson, but it's darn close. And I think that would lend itself very well to the kind of art that we want to display in this game overall. And think about it. We have a balance between cards on both sides of the table. We have even amounts of cards being picked and all of that. There is a balance that is quality we want to maintain. So in terms of what we want to arrive at for our art direction, these are the aspects that we need to explore and develop. There are also some priorities to maintain, just like design priorities of the whole game. This art direction is going to have priorities as well. Priorities meaning it is a numbered list. We are going to have to prioritize them, but the qualities could include something like balance, for example. There is a balance that is a quality we want to communicate basically throughout. Fantasy, for sure. Absolutely. Now, this might not be the right priority order, but I'm just listing them for now, and we would reorder them later. But that's the kind of thing we need to do. When we have all of the qualities we might art direction quality, the qualities we are wanting to focus on, we want to keep in mind. When we develop anything, we want to make sure that we, for example, in this case, have it balanced and it communicates fantasy, right? No matter what it is. Even if it's a simple UI element, it should communicate fantasy, for example, right? That's a good thing. We are going to want to list these qualities, prioritize them, and then use that as we go forward in developing shape, line, color, lighting, composition. At that time, what we will have is a collection of examples that describe this style in ways that will allow us to make characters, make environments, make visual effects, and make our UI. So it all has a unified art style because the art direction is developed, consistent, and imposed on every element. We will get there. That is what we're working on now, actually. There is something called an art Bible. It's nerdy me making documentation for this, but the idea is just like a game design document, an art Bible describes exactly these things, but formalizes them and puts them down on paper so we don't forget. And so we can edit it and revise it and make it better and show examples of it, etc. But this is kind of the idea. If I were to sketch out, say, an example of the character I might be thinking of, well, I absolutely love the cartoony, simplistic style that you see in, well, frankly, many emotes on Twitch and things. There's a cartoony style. It's not anime. If we do anime, let me tell you, maybe anime would work for the... There's a problem doing anime that conflicts with some of the things we're going for. But at best, anime style would be useful in the creatures and forces and battle, the really serious stuff. But that's the problem. It is actually too serious. For our fantasy environment, the people we save, the townspeople and stuff, there's a simplicity that we need to discover, and I'm just totally improv sketching this right now. But the idea is, this isn't well defined at all. I don't even know what this is. I guess if I put a tail on it, it might be a raccoon. I don't know. But the point is, I guess we need to have a mask to be a raccoon, but you get the idea. This might be expressive enough to explore, for example, shape, line, and then we could start with color and lighting. But right now I'm just saying, if this were an example character, I would be able to communicate fantasy, cartoony. I could absolutely add the color, right? Realism has been abandoned at this point, right? This is not realism, not even close, but it's much more closer to this, right? It's this point in the line where it's much closer to iconic, stylized, right? I would also evaluate like how fast was it to actually make this, right? If I have to make hundreds of drawings, I'm not going to do something that takes so much detail, right? I may do this for the images on the cards. I will not want to do this if I have, say, animated frames to do on characters, right? And I guess that's another art direction question is animation, because while animation is animation, it's just more images that move, right? But the point is, we can get away with some frames, fewer frames. It's called limited animation, and I think that style is going to work for us well, especially if the line and shape style is what we're describing here. So, okay, this is a silly representation of a raccoon. Sorry, raccoon. And is this going to be a final character in the game? No. No, we're exploring style. And I would say, okay, now that this is down on paper, now we can critique it. What works well? What could be better? Well, it's a simple shape. What's prominent is a face, which is great to communicate emotion, and we can say they are happy, they're sad. These characters actually need to do that in the context of our campaigns. That's good. I can tell it's a raccoon, but it doesn't need to be any more than iconic with a couple of details. So we're right here on the uncanny valley line here. Could we add color and try out different lighting and compose the setups for trying to get this balance and all that stuff? Yeah. Could we try a couple of frames and see if we can get away with limited animation? Yes. This is the kind of work we need to do to find the art direction we want. I have a feeling I'm going to be doing line work, which means also shape. I have a friend who's going to help me with color, which also is probably going to mean helping me with lighting. That might be both of us, actually. I will be doing composition and animation. So I'm going to want an art direction that doesn't take forever, right? If it is going to be me doing all this, I need to have I'm going to have some help where I need it, but I'm going to want it to be reproducible, simple enough, quick enough to do, yeah? While still communicating. I mean, this is a high bar. His work, Maxfield Parrish's work, is a high bar to achieve. And what I'm saying is we're borrowing the feeling of what his work does in a style that actually looks more like this. And then in the images of the cards, which there are 50, I have to remember that, it needs to have power. It needs to have danger. It needs to be more serious. So it can't be this style for the cards, the forces and creatures. So this is the beginning of an art direction discussion. This is, as I mentioned, I already started the art Bible, and I will continue that. I'll show you that when it's more developed, I guess. But for now, this is good enough to help us move forward. You could see, though, that if we had some intro cinematic that communicated the game's promise to a player who's never seen this game before and answered these very important questions all players ask, all audiences ask, actually. An audience goes into a movie and asks, "Who am I?" because they follow the main protagonist. So these 5 questions are answered in an opening cinematic. And even before then, if we really do a deep dive on what is the title of our game, how should we show the icon, the very first moments need this promise to be communicated so that the rest of the game can begin to support that promise and back it up. That's what we need to do. And without it, our game is broken. It really is. It kind of doesn't matter what this looks like. Or it doesn't, how do I say this? It doesn't matter how this plays, because it plays great. It actually works. There's only, and there is a bug, we need to fix a bug, but other than that, like, this does everything. But anyone who was coming into this the first time would be absolutely confused, and then it wouldn't be played. So it's useless. As great as we might think it is, it's useless until we address this, until we can actually promise this for the player, answer these questions with an opening cinematic. That is where we need to go next. So we're going to develop an art direction and lock it down so we can develop characters, environments, visual effects, and UI with that art. And we'll have some representative things to look over and critique. But at some point, it's going to be put into our game, piece by piece, probably this opening cinematic first, and then migrated to all the other parts of the game. I think those 50 cards are going to be a long effort because it's going to be a slow process for each one, and there's 50. So, all right. Well, that is where we are with this game. It is called Shuffle Wars, and we do get to work more on it together. I invite you to follow and show up on stream, make yourself known, and, cruise over to Discord. Actually, right now, you can play the prototype of this game because it's just sitting there. You download it, and it's nothing more than a zip file. Just be aware, it will be confusing unless you saw, for example, what we did today. If you do happen to playtest it, though, give some feedback on Discord. Would love to hear what you think works well and what could be better. Would love to hear what you expected to happen versus what actually happened for you. That would be great. Please don't just say, "Hey, it's great," because that doesn't help. Also, don't say, "Hey, it sucks," because that doesn't help. Instead, tell us what works well and what could be better, and practice critique. That is going to help the most. That is the end of our stream. Thank you for allowing me to go on and on about it. We'll come back later and do more art direction. And hopefully by then I will have an example or two to show off at least with shape and line. Have fun. Take care. See ya. Bye-bye.